Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly into twilight, not through the grand gates of Buckingham, but through the dew-damp grasses of Regent's Park. The leaves whisper above you, and somewhere in the distance, a swan flutters near the ornamental lake. But this isn't just a park, it's a stage, a subtle living backdrop where women with crowns, or just the burdens of leadership, have walked, wept, waged war, and won hearts in quieter ways than history books admit. You're about to meet them all? There's a chill in the breeze, just enough to make you clutch your coat tighter. It carries the scent of lilac and old stone, perfume and power. Underneath your boots lie paths once trodden by queens, real and symbolic. And tonight, you're walking them too. Though you're not wearing ermine, and there's no courtier trailing behind you, you feel it, that heavy, invisible thing, authority, or at least the memory of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, before we vanish into the hedges of time, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start, not with a coronation, but with a stroll. The grass is wet with recent rain, and lamplight spills gold over puddles on the paths. Regent's Park doesn't look like the seat of female authority, but don't be fooled. London hides its power in plain sight. These gardens, they've heard whispers sharper than any sword. As you pass under a flowering arch near the Queen Mary's Rose Garden, you can almost see her, Empress Matilda. No, she never wore an English crown. But oh, did she try? 1,000 years before anyone wore earbuds here, Matilda marched through a world that wasn't built for her. Daughter of Henry the Fur, widow of the Holy Roman Emperor, she came back to England in 1126, expecting, logically, lawfully, to be queen. Instead, she was offered suspicion, a woman with too much mind, too much bloodline, and far too little patience for male nobles playing kingmaker. You feel her presence on the gravel, boots heavy with ambition. Historians still argue whether her downfall was pride or politics, but you don't need a footnote to feel the grit. One night in 1142, surrounded by siege and snow, Matilda escaped Oxford Castle cloaked in white. She vanished into the night like a ghost, and survived. So next time someone tells you ladies weren't in the battlefield, smile sweetly and bring up Matilda in a blizzard. There's a rumor, one of those delicious, probably unprovable ones, that her retreat passed near the early hunting grounds that later became Regent's Park. Maybe it's fanciful, maybe it's true. Either way, the image sticks. A woman fleeing through frost, trailing royal blood and relentless fury. Not your average bedtime heroine. You pause by a weeping beech. The branches hang like gossiping courtiers. Here, silence has texture, leaf rustle, distant bicycle bell, the low bark of a dog. It's hard to imagine war councils among the daffodils. But that's where we're wrong, isn't it? Power often hides behind gentleness. Matilda's rivals underestimated her because she was a mother, because she didn't swing a sword, only commanded men who did. You keep walking. There's something oddly comforting in the way history circles. Matilda never officially reigned, but her son? He became Henry II. Her legacy didn't need a throne. It bled into the crown through lineage and legend. And it still lingers. A little stiff-necked resolve in the face of smug doubters. A raised eyebrow when someone says, "You can't." The clouds shift overhead. A plane carves a line above, momentarily pulling you back to now, but the ghosts don't leave. You sense them in the cool hush beneath the trees. And just ahead, another figure waits, cloaked not in snow, but in silk. Her name is Eleanor, and she's about to show you how to rule without ever raising your voice. Eleanor is waiting for you beneath an arbor so thick with vines it almost feels intentional, like history knew you'd need shade to handle her. You duck slightly, brushing aside a dangling spray of honeysuckle, and there she is, not in some fairy tale gown, but wrapped in the calculated softness of 12th century courtly fashion, rich, embroidered fabric that whispers with every move. You'd expect her to smile. She doesn't. You sit beside her on a mossy bench that definitely wasn't here in her day. But you sense she'd have approved the symmetry. Eleanor of Aquitaine is no shrinking flower. She's more of a thistle and gold thread, regal, sharp, and entirely inconvenient to those who thought queens should be seen and not heard. She ruled more land than any woman in Europe, twice a queen, once of France, then England, and mother to 2 kings, and not just any kings, Richard the Lionheart and John, yes, that John. You try parenting those 2 with no access to Wi-Fi or therapy. As birds flit across the canopy, you glance sideways. She's speaking Latin. No. French. No. Wait. Now she's quoting a poem. Her education was formidable. Eleanor wasn't just literate. She was a patron of the arts, of troubadours, and those slightly scandalous love poems that made medieval monks clutch their rosary beads just a little tighter. She didn't simply endure courtly love culture, she helped create it. Still, history likes to soften her into some sultry muse. But here under Regent's Park's whispering leaves, Eleanor sets the record straight. She was imprisoned for 16 years by her husband, King Henry II, after backing a rebellion by their sons. 16 years. That's several full Netflix eras of confinement. Historians still argue whether she incited the rebellion or merely supported it out of motherly despair. But Eleanor? She probably wouldn't care what they thought. You glance at a nearby couple pushing a pram. The baby's asleep. The parents arguing quietly about oat milk. Eleanor would have had them banished. A jogger passes, and Eleanor's eyes follow. You imagine her with a smartphone, live streaming political commentary in iambic pentameter. She wouldn't have been ignored, not in any era. There's something defiant in the roses blooming nearby. Too lush, too red, too much. Just like Eleanor. She returned to power after Henry's death and ruled as regent while Richard crusaded abroad. A woman over 60, managing kingdoms, arranging marriages, brokering treaties. You might worry about your back giving out after a day on your feet. Eleanor was organizing royal diplomacy while wearing heavy brocade and possibly a crown, and she wasn't all war and policy. She was charm with fangs. Once, she brought her own portable furniture to court in Poitiers so she could host salons. Picture it. Poetry readings with a side of power brokering, laughter laced with legal consequences. This wasn't brunch with the girls. This was empire building over wine. A squirrel darts past, reminding you the world is still turning, but you feel suspended, somehow, with Eleanor. You wonder what she'd make of today's monarchs. Would she approve of speeches written by committee, outfits chosen for symbolism, photo ops in children's hospitals? Maybe. But only if she could pick the lighting and rewrite the captions. You trail her down a gravel path, the ghost of her presence moving just ahead. A group of students laugh nearby, oblivious. Eleanor stops, turns, looks straight through time and says something soft and scathing about how easy it is to forget what women built. But she doesn't linger. Eleanor always moves forward. The next queen waits beyond the hedge, one with ice in her gaze and fire in her plans. Her name is Isabella, and she's about to invite you into her garden of secrets. The path curves, narrowing between hedges so meticulously trimmed they seem unnatural, like secrets in geometric form. You follow the faint rustle of silk, the sudden stillness of birdsong, and there she is, Isabella of France, Queen of England, seated beneath an ash tree that shouldn't feel this ominous. But it does. She doesn't rise to greet you. Isabella doesn't need to. Her eyes, cool as polished steel, do all the heavy lifting. You shift uncomfortably, as if you've been caught eavesdropping on a confession not meant for your ears. Except she wants you to hear. She planned for you to hear. Married to Edward II, Isabella knew early that her husband preferred the company of male favorites, especially a certain Piers Gaveston, whose influence over Edward was so intense it sparked a full-scale rebellion among the nobles. Isabella watched, waited, smiled politely while her husband ignored her, and then acted. Historians still argue whether Isabella was a victim, a schemer, or something far more complex. But here, in this quiet garden within Regent's Park, surrounded by dripping leaves and the faint sound of children in the distance, you begin to understand. This wasn't ambition for ambition's sake. This was survival. This was chess. They called her the she-wolf of France, which, to be fair, sounds like either a Game of Thrones villain or a misunderstood Disney protagonist. But wolves, they're loyal, protective, strategic. Isabella didn't gnaw her way to power. She played the long game. In 1326, she and her lover, Roger Mortimer, led an invasion of England. She overthrew Edward, her own husband. He was imprisoned, later murdered in a manner too gruesome for bedtime stories, though if you've ever wondered how a red-hot poker fits into royal drama, well, maybe save that for morning. Here's the twist. She didn't declare herself queen. Instead, she ruled through her son, the young Edward III. Technically, she was regent. Practically, she was sovereign. Regent's Park didn't exist yet, of course, but the ground remembers. There's something about well-tended nature hiding ruthless order that feels fitting. You stop by a small pond. A duck floats by like it owns the place. Isabella would approve. She governed for 4 years, until her son came of age. And then, poetic justice or political paranoia. Edward III, Mortimer, and executed him. Isabella was spared, sent to Castle Rising, where she lived out her days in quiet dignity, embroidering and receiving guests. One of those guests, a young queen named Philippa, who made a point of learning from Isabella's cautionary tale. There's a wild little story that Isabella carried her husband's heart around in a silver casket. Romantic, creepy, impossible to verify. Still, the image lingers. A woman wandering palace halls, a literal beating heart in her hands. You sit on a bench near the formal gardens, trying to picture her here. She'd hate the idea of being remembered only as the bitter wife or the villainess, and yet she'd probably smirk at how much power she still holds over the story. A couple takes wedding photos nearby. The bride adjusts her train. The groom adjusts his tie. They have no idea they're posing on soil that once belonged, in spirit if not in fact, to one of England's most dangerous women. Isabella rises in your mind like a tide, calculating, fierce, and utterly unafraid of history's judgment. She turns without a word and disappears into the hedge. And now, in the shifting light, another woman waits. She never married. She never shared power. And she hunted with hawks and courtiers both. You know her. Everyone does. Elizabeth. Elizabeth doesn't arrive. She appears, not with fanfare or the clatter of a royal retinue, just a subtle shift in the wind, a tightening of your spine, and suddenly, she's there, standing motionless at the edge of the clearing, one hand resting lightly on the hilt of a fan that is absolutely not just a fan. It's a weapon, a warning, and an extension of her will. You know her face before she speaks. Elizabeth the Virgin Queen. Gloriana, a monarch who painted herself into myth and still managed to keep a dagger hidden under the poetry. You trail behind her through a grove that somehow feels like a hunting ground, despite the chirp of robins and the soft whimper of squirrels. Elizabeth wasn't the sort to chase prey through the underbrush. She waited for them to approach. Power, after all, is best served cool. And yet she loved to hunt, not just in the literal sense, though she did ride out with hawks and hounds, but her real quarry, courtiers, ambassadors, foreign kings in ruffled collars. She circled them with words, tested their nerves with long silences, and skewered them with a single lift of her eyebrow. You're lucky you're not here to negotiate. She pauses near a yew tree. The leaves glisten in the morning dew, dark and evergreen, just like her legend. Historians still argue whether she was truly averse to marriage or simply weaponized celibacy into the most brilliant diplomatic tactic of the century. Either way, Elizabeth turned refusal into policy. Spain wanted her hand. She offered half a smile and a trade agreement. France wanted a wedding. She offered a portrait. The men of her court adored her, feared her, danced for her, and she kept them all at arm's length, right where she liked them. There's a fringe anecdote, delightfully petty, that she once slapped a lady in waiting across the face for marrying without permission. It may not be provable, but the vibe checks out. And speaking of waiting, she made them all wait. For her affections, her approval, even her death. No heir, no husband, just an empire, a cult of personality, and a legacy varnished in gold leaf and powdered sugar. You walk with her past the ornamental lake in Regent's Park, imagining the reflections of ruffs and velvet, the flurry of feathered hats. She's talking now, low, clipped sentences about betrayal, loyalty, and how pearls don't just symbolize purity, they hide flaws under pressure. Your feet crunch on the gravel path. Tourists walk past, not noticing the queen beside you. A child screams about ice cream. Elizabeth doesn't flinch. She's been called worse names by better-dressed nobles. You reach a stone bench and sit. She remains standing, framed by hedges that bloom with unnatural perfection. You think she'd approve of the control. The illusion of wildness reined in just enough. She was an artist of power, you realize, a choreographer of silence. And perhaps no moment captures her better than the Tilbury speech. Her voice rising, her hand steady, declaring that though she had the body of a weak and feeble woman, she had the heart and stomach of a king, and a king of England too. Chills, literal chills. Then, as abruptly as she arrived, she's gone, no flourish, no royal goodbye. Just the rustle of skirts disappearing into a hedge that definitely wasn't there a second ago. You blink. Another figure approaches. The music of the garden shifts. Less power, more performance. It's time for mask balls, feathered masks, and diplomacy done in pantomime. Henrietta Maria is about to take the stage. You don't see her right away. You hear her. A soft rustle of silk, laughter behind a fan, the faint echo of vials and footsteps from a long-gone mask. And then she steps out, not into a battlefield, but onto a stage framed by box hedges and pale blooms. Henrietta Maria, Queen of England, daughter of the Medici-blooded French court, and living proof that theater and politics have never been truly separate. She glides, not walks, every movement practiced, choreographed. Her posture speaks of lessons in Versailles, of tutors whispering how queens must never seem hurried, even when kingdoms crumble. You follow her, or try to. She's already halfway across the garden by the time your feet start moving. She doesn't slow down. Henrietta Maria has spent her life racing public opinion and parliamentary disdain, and she's not about to stop for you. She married Charles I, a king who mistook divine right for good public relations. Henrietta brought Catholicism, lavish spending, and, most damning of all, French theater into a tense, Puritan-leaning England. She sponsored masques, glittering performances combining myth, dance, and political subtext so thick you could cut it with a bejeweled dagger. Historians still argue whether she manipulated her husband into civil war or simply refused to play the silent consort. Either way, the optics weren't great. Henrietta once reportedly staged a pastoral masque in Whitehall while Parliament debated the limits of royal power. Imagine putting on a play about woodland nymphs while democracy peeks nervously through the curtains. You sit beside her in a mock arbor where roses twist like secrets. She smells of oranges and anxiety. Her influence over Charles was legendary and public. Too public. Protestant pamphleteers painted her as the foreign Jezebel, the scheming queen behind the curtain. One even depicted her as a literal she-devil, cloven hooves and all. Not exactly bedtime reading, but here's the strange part. When war broke out, Henrietta didn't hide behind velvet. She sold her jewels to fund the royalist army. She raised troops. She smuggled in weapons through Dutch ports. She even dodged gunfire on the battlefield. No one expected the queen to have a better aim than half the aristocracy, but Henrietta wasn't there for decoration. She was there to win. A quirky fringe detail? During a dangerous channel crossing, a storm nearly sank her ship. The crew panicked. Henrietta calmly picked up a chicken, tucked it under her arm, and walked onto the deck in full court dress, praying aloud until the storm passed. Chicken diplomacy. Not officially recognized by the UN, but still impressive. She lost. Of course. The monarchy crumbled. Charles was beheaded. Her mask ended in blood and exile. You sit together in the garden of a modern age. Somewhere, a group of actors rehearses a Shakespeare monologue in the open air, midsummer comedy. Probably. Henrietta watches, lips pursed. You wonder if she'd be pleased or insulted. She never returned to power, but her children did. Charles II, the merry monarch, came back to rule. Henrietta's legacy, like her theater, lived on in symbolism, masked, stylized, impossible to separate from the performance. She turns to you and smiles. Finally, it's not warm, but it is real. And then she vanishes between two hedges that weren't there before. You wait. The breeze changes. Softer now. Coming down the path is a new queen, not wrapped in lace or poetry, but in steadiness and teacups. She doesn't demand attention. She just has it. Catherine of Braganza is bringing the tea. She comes without thunder. Catherine of Braganza steps softly into view, her skirts barely brushing the stone path, her gaze steady but unreadable. You wouldn't peg her for someone who changed a culture. She doesn't sparkle like Henrietta or blaze like Elizabeth Waking. She arrives like steam, quiet, curling, everywhere before you realize it. You fall in beside her, and she offers you something without speaking. Tea. Yes, That tea, the one you might be drinking right now, you cradle the phantom porcelain in your hands, feeling its imagined warmth, while she calmly introduces you to her real contribution to Britain, not scandal, not sedition, but a revolution in taste, married to Charles II, the post-Civil War king, known for bawdy court entertainments and countless mistresses. Catherine of Braganza was the opposite, Catholic, dignified, and perpetually under scrutiny, in a court that applauded cleavage and clever quips. She arrived with prayer books and almond paste. Historians still argue whether she was politically irrelevant or strategically serene, but here's what's certain. She brought with her 3 gifts from Portugal: sugar, porcelain, and tea. That's not just a shopping list. That's the future of English identity. You sit beneath a weeping cherry tree, the blossoms fluttering like lace. Catherine sets her cup down. In her day, tea was considered medicinal, exotic, even suspicious, but she made it fashionable. Morning, afternoon, twilight, it all became a ritual. Quietly, persistently, she reshaped English daily life from the inside out. But don't mistake refinement for weakness. Catherine had to fight, hard, not with swords, but with silence. She endured attempts to annul her marriage, rumors of infertility, even plots to poison her. Charles fathered children by mistresses, but Catherine bore the brunt of public disappointment. No heir, no loud protests, just composure, a master class in passive resistance. A delightful fringe anecdote: when one of Charles's mistresses, Barbara Palmer, barged into court functions flaunting her influence, Catherine once collapsed in a faint, allegedly from stress, possibly from drama, perhaps both. Either way, Barbara was temporarily banned. Victory by swoon. Here in Regent's Park, Catherine seems at home, the orderliness of it, the curated nature, the civility layered over chaos. She walks slowly past an iron gate and nods toward a blooming border of camellias, flowers she would have known from Lisbon. You ask her something, but she only smiles. She knows how to keep power without raising her voice. The wind picks up, ruffling the leaves. Somewhere behind you, laughter, joggers, a dog off leash, London pulses, unaware that a Portuguese queen still stirs its teapots and rhythms. And then Catherine steps into a patch of sunlight and is gone. The path turns again. But this time, it leads not to a queen on a throne, but to a woman who held no crown, and yet ruled in whispers and invitations. You're about to meet a different kind of queen. No coronation, no titles, just a seat at the king's table, and influence sharp enough to change history. The mistresses are waiting. You enter a garden within a garden, less formal, no marble statues or processional paths, just overgrown lilacs, ivy clinging to aged trellises, and benches that seem to have forgotten they were once carved to impress. This is the unofficial court, the shadow court, where power wears perfume instead of armor. You're not here to meet a crowned queen. You're here for the women who ruled without ruling, the royal mistresses, the courtesans turned advisors, confidants, and cultural icons. No scepters, just wit, beauty, timing, and sometimes a little blackmail. They appear like gossip, drifting out from behind trimmed hedges, one after another. You recognize Barbara Palmer, of course, favorite of Charles, infamous for her scandalous portraits and even more scandalous temperament. Her bodice is aggressively ambitious, her eyes gleefully ruthless. She winks at you as though you're in on the joke, and maybe for this moment, you are. Barbara was technically the Countess of Castlemaine. But in practice, she ran things. A Catholic in a Protestant court, loud when silence was expected, and always, where Charles was looking. She bore him 5 children, sat in on cabinet discussions, got pensions, titles, and enemies exiled. One ambassador once described her influence as a storm in satin. Apt, you shift to the next. Louise de Querouaille glides forward, French, elegant, much quieter than Barbara, but just as effective. She was installed at court by Louis XIV himself. That's right, France planted a spy as a royal mistress. Historians still debate whether Louise truly loved Charles or loved her paycheck. But she held sway for a decade, gracefully feeding French interests while maintaining her position with honeyed diplomacy. And then, Nell Gwyn. You hear her before you see her. Laughter, rough and melodic, echoing through the roses. When she does emerge, it's barefoot, dragging a hem torn from chasing actors backstage. Nell wasn't titled, at least not when she started. She sold oranges in the theater, worked as an actress, and caught Charles's eye. But unlike the others, she wielded humor like a rapier. When a crowd booed her carriage, mistaking her for a Catholic mistress, she famously shouted, "Good people, I am the Protestant whore." And just like that, she won them over. Nell is holding a daisy now, picking at the petals, still half laughing at the absurdity of history. She never pretended to be more than what she was, and yet she walked the halls of power, secured estates, and ensured her son was named a duke, all with a joke, a wink, and absolutely no shame. You sit among them on a low stone bench, a silent guest at this royal salon of the untitled. The air smells like lavender and opportunism. They don't fight over you. They know better. Each had her moment. Each left a mark. There's a fringe theory that one of Nell's descendants ended up as a clerk in Parliament and quietly shaped several reform bills. Probably false. Still, imagine the symmetry. It's easy to scoff at mistresses as footnotes, but here, surrounded by their presence, you see them differently. They weren't just companions, they were influencers before the term existed, fashion icons, political conduits, cultural curators, and, often, scapegoats. They bore the public's moral fury, so the king's could remain untarnished. A robin lands nearby. Nell tosses it an invisible crumb. Barbara rolls her eyes. Louise sighs in French. And then, the garden empties. Not suddenly, like perfume fading from a scarf. You rise. Ahead, the path stiffens again. A proper avenue. Orderly, graveled, lined with trees that have witnessed coronations and coups alike. At the end of it, waits a throne shared uneasily, held in balance, like a sword on a fingertip. Mary, too, is ready, and she's not smiling. You walk slower now. The gravel underfoot crunches with purpose, and the trees seem to narrow, straightening like soldiers as you approach. This part of Regent's Park feels more formal, colder, even, like a courtroom with leaves, and waiting at the far end of the avenue is Mary II, Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland, but only half a queen. You sense that immediately. Mary doesn't rush to greet you. She stands still, spine too straight, palms folded like parchment creased at the edge. She's dressed in Protestant severity, dark silks, a high collar, no frills, dignity as defense. Her eyes flicker toward the sky, maybe waiting for a sign that never came. She was born royal, daughter of James II, but raised in the shadow of religious suspicion. Her Catholic father's reign left the country teetering, and when Parliament turned against him, they turned to her. but only if she'd agree to share the throne with her husband. William of Orange, her first cousin, her political partner, her husband, and her co-sovereign. That sounds reasonable on paper, but you feel it immediately, standing beside her on the path. She never ruled alone, and yet she bore the weight of both crowns. Historians still argue whether Mary was truly a monarch or simply a wife placed beside power. But Mary knew her role. She navigated court with grace, often yielding public space to William, even when it meant swallowing pride the size of a kingdom. She could have rebelled. She didn't. She could have demanded a solo rule. She didn't. But don't mistake that for passivity. You pass a fountain, its trickle echoing like a ticking clock. Mary stops beside it. Her gaze doesn't leave the water. You can almost hear her thoughts. Diplomacy is a quieter war. During the Glorious Revolution of 1688, it was Mary's bloodline that gave the new regime legitimacy. Parliament needed her to balance William's foreignness. Without her, the whole thing was just a Dutch invasion. With her, it became a restoration of order, a velvet coup, if you like your history with poetic spin, a lesser-known story. Mary loved interior design. No, really. She took particular joy in decorating royal palaces, favoring symmetry, Dutch tulips, and porcelain collections. Her Kensington Palace makeover became a kind of visual soft power, a queen's taste shaping a nation's aesthetics. The modern Mary II style is still referenced by furniture historians. Go on, ask them. You sit with her on a wrought iron bench, and she talks about God, governance, and guilt. Mary was deeply religious, haunted by the belief that she'd sinned by unseating her own father, even though he fled the throne, even though Parliament begged her. The guilt never left. She ruled in William's absence when he was at war. She dealt with plots, riots, dissent. But when he returned, she stepped back. Always back. You ask her if she regrets it. She doesn't answer. A dog runs past, its leash trailing, its owner shouting. Mary barely blinks. You realize she's been watching a woman push a pram around the flower beds, the baby inside sleeping peacefully. Mary never had children. One pregnancy ended in miscarriage. No heirs. No future monarchs to carry her legacy. That legacy, then, rests only in law. The Bill of Rights 1689, passed during her reign, defined constitutional monarchy in England. It's still cited, still binding. Mary never wrote a single line of it, but her crown sealed it. You rise. She doesn't. As you step away, her figure becomes part of the bench, part of the path, part of the silence. And ahead, another shape moves toward you, limping slightly, eyes hollow but alert. She wears sorrow like a second skin. It's Queen Anne, and the throne has never looked heavier. You see her before she sees you. Queen Anne moves slowly, heavily, not just from the weight of her skirts, which drag like velvet anchors behind her, but from something deeper. Her gaze is downcast, not out of shame, but from sheer exhaustion. Power, when it came to Anne, was less a crown and more a cross. She settles onto a wooden bench near a trimmed hedge that looks like it might once have been a unicorn. Children's laughter echoes nearby from the playground, and you feel a sting of irony twist the air. Anne had 17 pregnancies. None of her children lived past childhood. She pats the bench beside her without looking. You sit. There's a kind of queen who commands armies, and a kind who crafts alliances. Anne is neither. Her reign, stretching from 1702 to 1714 is one of war and whispers, of gout and grief, of unexpected legacy. She never sought to sparkle. She endured. Historians still argue whether she was manipulated by her ministers or quietly shrewd beneath layers of sentiment. What's clearer is that Anne reigned during a pivotal moment, the Act of Union of 1707, which officially united England and Scotland into Great Britain. That's right, you're sitting next to the woman who literally created the UK, and yet few remember her for it. You glance at her hand resting on the bench, swollen fingers. Anne suffered from terrible health, gout, obesity, constant pain. There's a fringe account of her being carried around in a specially designed sedan chair because walking became impossible. And still, she governed. Her court was not glamorous but tense, marked by faction, rivalry, and one of the most intimate political relationships in British history. Anne and Sarah Churchill, Duchess of Marlborough, best friends, confidants, perhaps more, though historians bicker endlessly about the nature of their bond. Sarah was brilliant, domineering, and possibly the only person Anne trusted implicitly, until she didn't. Their falling out was Shakespearean. Public letters, private insults, tears, replacements. Enter Abigail Masham, quieter, subtler. Everything Sarah was in a power triangle with powdered wigs and venomous gossip. You want to ask Anne if she regrets choosing Abigail. She doesn't answer, but her sigh sinks deeper than the bench. Anne turns to you, eyes glassy. Her rule was plagued by constant loss, not just of heirs, but of stability. And yet, under her leadership, the War of the Spanish Succession raged and tilted Europe's balance. Marlborough's military genius, funded, directed, and, permitted by Anne, secured Britain's rising power. She never gave a Tilbury speech, never posed astride a charger. She signed documents in pain, ruled with patience, and made room for an empire to emerge. A pigeon lands nearby and pecks at the gravel. Anne watches it. There's a softness to her now, something tender buried beneath the layers of formality. She wasn't built for court theatrics, yet she sat through every act. Her portraits hide it well, but Anne's reign was the bridge between Stuart absolutism and Hanoverian modernity, between old divine rights and the pragmatic politics of Parliament. You rise to leave, and she grips your hand, not tightly, just enough to make you pause. There's no throne at her feet, no scepter, just grief and strength, and a nation held together through quiet resolve. She lets go, and you move forward again. Ahead, the garden widens. The air is cooler. You hear laughter, not from courtiers, but from scholars. This queen plays chess with philosophers and drinks coffee with scientists. Caroline of Ansbach is waiting, and she's already halfway through a book. You find her under an elm, one leg crossed over the other, sunlight flickering through the branches like applause across her lap. She doesn't look up from her book, not right away. She wants you to earn her attention. And fair enough, Caroline of Ansbach, queen consort to George II, is used to being the smartest person in the room, and probably the least credited. She closes the book at last, marking her place with a sliver of pressed violet. Her eyes meet yours, sharp, bright, amused. You realize that if previous queens governed with grace or grief, Caroline ruled through intellect. She was born a German princess, educated beyond expectation, married off with the usual pomp and politics. But something in her never settled into the decorative mold. You sit beside her, and the first thing she does is, quote, Leibniz, in German, with perfect cadence. You blink. She smiles. Historians still argue whether she was more influential than her husband or merely more palatable. But George II depended on her, deeply. She ran the Privy Council in his absence, advised on every appointment, even managed the volatile politics between the king and their son, who hated each other with such dramatic fervor it could have powered an opera season. A delightful and slightly awkward fringe detail. George once ran from a political meeting in a rage. Caroline smoothed it over by pretending to faint. This gave the ministers an excuse to pause the meeting and reconvene under calmer conditions. You realize you're sitting beside a woman who weaponized her own fainting spells for national diplomacy. The walk continues along a path lined with classical statues, fitting for a queen who collected mines. Caroline surrounded herself with Enlightenment thinkers, Newton, Pope, Voltaire. She turned court into salon, power into discussion. She wasn't ruling from the battlefield. She was building the future over tea, science, and chessboards. She pauses near a sundial. It's casting a long shadow. Time's only cruel if you waste it, she says, more to herself than to you. You ask her about being a queen. Queen? She shrugs. That's the job. Influence. That's the art. And oh, did she paint? Caroline subtly championed causes like smallpox inoculation, lending her support to controversial ideas with careful calculation. In 1722, she convinced George to allow a certain Dr. Clark, who was preaching dangerously liberal theology, to keep his post. She protected thinkers the way knights protect queens in chess, quietly, and with consequences. You move past the lake. A swan glides past like a powdered wig drifting on purpose. Caroline watches it for a moment, then turns. Don't trust swans, she mutters. Too pretty, too loud. Another thing, Caroline had a dry wit. Very dry. A modern ghostwriter would make her a viral Twitter account in 5 minutes. She once reportedly said of a visiting noblewoman, "She has a fine soul. Pity she leaves it at home when she dresses for court." You're halfway through smiling when she stops. Her hand tightens on yours, because she knows what's coming. Death didn't arrive suddenly. Caroline had a hernia. She refused surgery until it was too late, on her deathbed. George wept. "Open my heart, and you will find Caroline engraved upon it," he said, though frankly, it probably sounded better in German. She looks up at you. Don't let anyone bury you in titles. They rust. Minds don't. And then she's gone. Just like that. A rustle of pages. The scent of ink and lemon. You stand in the center of Regent's Park, and the air thickens, not with sorrow, but with resolve. The next queen comes cloaked in mourning and iron. She'll reign longer than any woman before her, and she won't just inherit an empire, she'll define it. Victoria is on her way. She arrives like the century itself, cloaked in soot, steel, and certainty. Queen Victoria, the woman who turned grief into governance, is standing beneath a wrought iron arch, trellised with vines. The flowers here are tamer, trimmed within an inch of their lives, rose bushes like soldiers, not lovers. You understand why. This is a queen who didn't tolerate wildness. She pruned it. You don't approach her. She approaches you. She's not tall, not majestic in the way a sculptor might carve, but her presence is overwhelming. Like the tick of a train wheel in the distance, or the slow approach of fog you can't escape. Victoria doesn't glitter. She weighs, Her black dress, even now, is immaculate. Grief is not a phase for her. It's a uniform. Since Prince Albert's death in 1861, she has worn black and never stopped. The man she adored, leaned on, ruled beside, gone. And in his place, a silence that echoes louder than any coronation anthem. Yet still she ruled, for 63 years, over an empire that spanned 1/4 of the globe. She became an icon, etched onto coins, stamps, teacups, and colonial edicts. And yet, historians still argue, was she empowered by her role, or merely enclosed within it? Did she lead the empire, or did the empire carry her like a portrait on a banner? She doesn't answer. She's already walking. You follow her past a thicket of oak and laurel, trees that have seen more than they tell. Victoria's pace is surprisingly brisk. She governed during a time of astonishing change. Railroads, photography, telegraphs, the rise of industrial cities. Science exploded, morals twisted, empire expanded, and through it all, she remained, like a mountain peak obscured by modern fog but never eroded. There's a bench nearby carved with a lion and unicorn. She sits, finally, and you do the same. She tells you about her prime ministers. She had 10. She liked some. Lord Melbourne was practically a crush. Despised others. She called Gladstone that dreadful old man, and clashed famously with Disraeli before admiring his theatrical charm. He flattered, she says with the ghost of a smile, but at least he listened. A curious fringe fact. She hated elevators. When they were installed at Windsor Castle, she insisted on being pulled up and down in them manually, by footmen. Queens. They're just like us, except when they're not. You ask about her children. She had 9, and many of them were married off into Europe's royal houses, earning her the nickname the grandmother of Europe. But motherhood, for her, was more duty than warmth. Govern them as one does a country, she says, with firmness, routine, and occasional biscuits. A robin hops near her shoe. She glances down, frowns slightly. Too much movement. Birds should know their place. And yet, there's vulnerability under the steel. Victoria suffered from anxiety, possibly even agoraphobia, especially after Albert's death. She withdrew from public life so thoroughly that Britain nearly questioned the monarchy's relevance. It took decades and careful rebranding to position her as the matriarch of a modern empire, stoic, moral, unyielding. You walk with her now toward the lake. Tourists float by on pedal boats. A child cries about spilled juice. Victoria ignores them all. Monarchy, she says, is performance, but it must be sincere, or it rots. The scent of iron and rain fills the air. You realize you're no longer speaking with just a woman. You're speaking with a century. And then, just as the clouds begin to break, she vanishes behind a veil of ivy, leaving you with a new sound, not silence, but shouts, voices, women's voices, marching. You're no longer in the realm of queens by blood. You've stepped into the era of queens by will. The suffragettes are waiting. You don't walk into it. You're swept. The silence of monarchs gives way to the footsteps of thousands, boots, shoes, heeled leather, soft soles beating a rhythm down the gravel walkways of Regent's Park. Placards sway like banners, sashes flash purple, white, green. The suffragettes have arrived, and you're marching with them now. There is no single queen here, no coronet, no throne, but the energy, it's unmistakable. Power is no longer inherited, it's demanded, and it sounds like protest songs, rustling pamphlets, and the sharp strike of votes for women on a handmade sign. You're handed one. Don't drop it, says a woman beside you in a high-collared blouse and steel in her eyes. She's in her 60s, but she strides like someone 30 years younger. You realize she's been doing this for decades. Millicent Fawcett, perhaps, or Emmeline Pankhurst, maybe Christabel, or one of the hundreds of women history didn't bother to footnote. They don't care how you got here. Only that you march, you pass the boating lake, and someone shouts statistics, how many times they've been arrested. Someone else calls out dates, failed bills, broken promises, and through it all, Regent's Park bears witness, just as it did for royal mistresses and mourning queens. But now the perfume is ink and sweat, and the crown is metaphorical and political. Historians still argue whether the suffrage movement succeeded because of its militancy or despite it. Some broke windows, some burned postboxes, some simply wrote letters every single day for 30 years. All of them carved out space in the national consciousness. There's a story, possibly true, possibly theatrical, about a suffragette who chained herself to a park bench here, right in Regent's Park. Police couldn't remove her without damaging public property, so they waited. She waited longer. Eventually, someone brought tea. British. After all. Another woman presses a pamphlet into your hand. Men said we weren't ready. She says, we said, try stopping us. You look around, and you begin to see the queens, not in velvet, in linen, in factory uniforms, in university robes, in nursing aprons stained with trench blood. These are the regents of their own lives, stepping out of the shadows of consorts and heirs. You pass a statue, temporary, fabric-wrapped. It reads, "Courage calls to courage everywhere." Words from Fawcett, carved in stone. Regent's Park has changed. London has changed. And the women walking beside you, they're the ones who cracked it open. As you exit the crowd, it thins, not with defeat, but with purpose. Each woman melts back into her era, her job, her fight. But the sound never quite fades. It lingers, like a heartbeat, until you reach the next clearing. Quieter now, softer. You see a maid brushing the hem of a gown, a hand fixing a cuff. A whisper before the monarch enters the room. You're entering the chamber behind the chamber, where power never wore a crown, just silence. The hush here is thicker than any silence before it. You've stepped into the inner sanctum, a world of screens, satin slippers, and unsaid commands. This is the chamber behind the throne, where the real power doesn't announce itself, but lingers like perfume on velvet. You are now among the ladies of the bedchamber, the monarch's closest attendants, gatekeepers to both intimacy and influence. No one bows here, but no one relaxes either. You sit beside one, her fingers deftly mending a torn hem. Another brushes out a cloak with strokes so gentle you wonder if she's calming herself or the cloth. Their faces are composed, blank, unreadable, exactly as they've been trained to be. But don't mistake discretion for dullness. These women are political instruments in soft shoes. A footman passes, not meeting your eye. One of the ladies whispers, "They think we gossip. We draft history." She isn't wrong. Throughout British history, these women, nobly born, carefully chosen, have wielded influence with surgical precision. They saw the sovereign daily, undressed them, comforted them, protected them from boredom, scandal, and rebellion. Want a private word with the Queen? You go through them. Want a rumor smothered? You best bribe the right ear. Want policy softened? Best do it over embroidery and size. Historians still argue whether their power was real or ceremonial. But consider this. During Queen Victoria's reign, the so-called bedchamber crisis of 1839 nearly collapsed a government. Why? Because Victoria refused to dismiss her Whig ladies of the bedchamber when a Tory prime minister tried to stack her household. It was about curtains on paper, but underneath, it was about loyalty, control, and female agency in a patriarchal court. And what about Elizabeth I? Her ladies knew everything. Cycles, secrets, whispered names in the dark. It said one discovered a love letter from the Earl of Essex hidden in a bodice. That lady's fate? Lost to time, but her knowledge changed court politics. There's a delightful and slightly terrifying anecdote about Queen Anne's bedchamber ladies once breaking into open argument during a royal dressing, each tugging at the Queen's undergarments in an attempt to assert precedence. Imagine being pulled in 3 directions at once by women with tiaras and sharp elbows. Protocol by wrestling match, one historian called it. Likely exaggerated, but wouldn't you love to have seen it? You follow them now, ghosts in muslin and brocade, through a hedged path that loops gently around a water garden. This is where they took air with the Queen, where they whispered their truths in careful tones, where they sometimes, just sometimes, let the weight of responsibility slip from their posture and dared to laugh. They speak in code. The roses are wilting, means the Queen is unhappy. The lavender is late, means someone is about to be dismissed. Everything matters, even silence. They stop at a stone bench and gather around you. One leans in and says, "We were the mirrors. The Queen saw herself in us. We gave her back only what she could bear." And just like that, they vanish. No curtain call, no parade, only the distant sound of a brush on fabric, somewhere behind the hedges. You're left blinking at the garden, unsure if they were real at all. And then you hear a distant whistle, a low rumble. The Blitz is coming. And a woman in pearls is standing in the wreckage, holding a teacup like a sword. Elizabeth Bowes Lyon, the Queen Mother, is waiting. The garden is gone. Ash replaces roses. The scent of honeysuckle is drowned in smoke and concrete dust. You blink through the gray. Buildings are half standing, chimneys jagged, and in the middle of the rubble stands a woman in a pastel coat and pearls, steady as a cathedral. Elizabeth Bowes Lyon, the Queen Mother. No throne, no ceremony, just presence, unflinching. Her heels click on stone where a school used to be. In one gloved hand she holds a teacup. In the other, the hand of a child whose world has just caved in. And she doesn't blink. You step closer. There are sandbags where park benches used to be. Regent's Park, like the rest of London, has become a living battlefield. And Elizabeth? She doesn't leave. They told her to evacuate the children. They told her to go to Canada, to stay safe. But she said, "The children won't go without me. I won't leave without the king. And the king will never leave." She wasn't just standing with Britain. She became Britain. She walks with you past what was once a flower bed, now a crater. Her shoes are polished. Her smile is faint. Her eyes, though ferocious. You begin to understand why Hitler reportedly called her the most dangerous woman in Europe. Historians still debate whether she held real political sway or if her role was entirely symbolic, but symbols matter when bombs fall. And Elizabeth understood her image was a weapon of morale. She toured bomb sites. She visited hospitals. She brushed ash from her lapel and smiled for the camera. She made resilience look elegant, A fringe detail? After Buckingham Palace was bombed, she reportedly looked at the smoking ruins and said, "I'm glad we've been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." You pass a sculpture, partially shattered. She pauses beside it. "Beauty will return," she says. "It always does. You just have to stand long enough." She wasn't just queen consort to George VI. She was the steel frame beneath his hesitant reign. After his death, she became the matriarch, the survivor, the national grandmother. Winston Churchill adored her. Princess Elizabeth, her daughter, learned calm from her. And the public? They clung to her poise like a warm coat in wartime. You walk past a chapel garden now, flowers beginning to grow again in the crater's edge. The birds are back, impossibly, life, unbothered by shrapnel. Elizabeth's voice lowers. "We built from worse than this," she murmurs. "More to the wind than to you." You look around. You believe her. She hands you the teacup. It's warm. Somehow. And then she walks off. Back into the smoke. Back into the city. Back into a role she never stopped playing. As the fog lifts, you hear something lighter. A bell. Not royal. Personal. A pair of corgis bounds into view, and behind them, dressed in tailored green, waving to tourists, quietly rewriting the rules, is Elizabeth II, the queen who drove herself, the queen who ruled when monarchy met modernity. She's not where you expect her. No throne, no trumpets, just a practical coat, a silk scarf tied beneath her chin, and a small wave to a gardener who doesn't seem to realize he's been greeted by the monarch. Elizabeth II, the longest reigning queen in British history, is walking alone down a quiet path in Regent's Park. Two corgis, trotting dutifully beside her. You fall into step without being asked. She doesn't look like someone who held weekly audiences with prime ministers for 70 years, and she looks like someone taking a very brisk walk. You have to pick up the pace to keep up, and then you realize that's the point. Elizabeth didn't perform monarchy. She inhabited it relentlessly, quietly, and without pause. Her reign began in mourning, her father dead, her crown heavy, and lasted through nearly every social and political shift of the 20th and 21st centuries. But she never wavered, not publicly, not once. Historians still argue how much political influence she had behind closed doors. Some say none. Others point to her regular audiences with over a dozen prime ministers. She never gave public opinion, but she always gave presence. Even her dogs are polite. One stops to sniff a flower bed. She tugs the leash gently. "Come on, we've work to do," she says softly. She stops by a small monument. You both regard it. It's a stone plinth marking a spot used during World War II for civilian fire drills. She lays a hand on it and doesn't speak. That's how she ruled, through symbols, gestures, and silence that meant everything. You sit with her on a green painted bench. It's peeling a little. She doesn't mind. She's worn a lifetime of weather herself. "I have to be seen to be believed," she says, almost to herself, a phrase she repeated over decades, through thousands of public engagements, walkabouts, and factory visits. Not declarations of power, but visibility. She was monarchy as infrastructure, steady, predictable, necessary. There's a quirky story. She once drove the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia around Balmoral in her Land Rover. At the time, women weren't even allowed to drive in his country. She reportedly took the corners fast, very fast. You walk again. She passes families with strollers, joggers and wireless earbuds, teenagers pretending not to notice, Some glance up and blink. Isn't that? No. Can't be. But it is. She's smiling faintly now, her hands folded over one another. She nods toward a child feeding pigeons. They don't see the weight, she says. That's what makes it bearable. You ask about loss, her father, her sister, her husband, eventually her own legacy. She doesn't reply, but you remember the image, alone at Prince Philip's funeral, socially distanced like the rest of the kingdom, a sovereign, and a widow. And still she waved the next day. You reach the rose garden. She stops. It's yours now, she says. All of it. The duty, the watching. And then she walks away, slower now, toward a tree-lined horizon that bends around a quiet bend in the path. The dogs follow. No guards, no trumpets, just a woman and a queen. But as her footsteps fade, something stirs in the air. A camera flash, then another, and another. A different kind of royalty is about to arrive, glittered not in lineage, but in light. The world is watching, and Diana is walking into the frame. The silence breaks with a click, a camera shutter, then another, then a storm of them, rapid, rhythmic, relentless. You shield your eyes instinctively, but she doesn't flinch. Diana walks through Regent's Park like she owns it, though she knows better than anyone that no one owns anything in the glare of 1,000 lenses. Her heels click softly on the paved path, echoing louder than any coronation march. She's not wearing a tiara, just oversized sunglasses, a tailored blazer, and a kind of calm that looks effortless until you remember what it cost. There are no corgis this time, only whispers. Is that her? She waved at me. She smiled. And she did. That's her power. Diana didn't need to wear the crown. She bent it, reshaped it, made it glitter in places no one had dared before. You walked beside her, but slightly behind. She was always in front, by force or by choice. The media made sure that, and she learned to use it, not at first, but eventually. Historians still argue whether she was a revolutionary or a victim of myth-making. Some say she manipulated the public, others that she was destroyed by it. But here in the filtered green light of the park, you see something else, a woman who walked the tightrope of royalty and humanity, and never looked down. A child runs past, holding a red balloon. Diana crouches down, asks the child's name, smiles like she means it. She always did. That was her rebellion, real affection, not just ritualized interest. She hugged AIDS patients when no one else would. She walked through minefields in Angola with more courage than many heads of state. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, but delicious, that Buckingham Palace once tried to limit her solo public appearances. She went anyway. They said I needed handlers, she once muttered. I think I needed a better audience. You pass the edge of the formal garden, where a statue now stands, her statue, unveiled long after her death. She doesn't look at it. Diana never admired her own reflection. She lived too close to it. You try to speak, but she stops you with a look. There's no script, she says. That's what terrified them. You walk in silence a while longer. Tourists stare. Some take photos. And still she moves like someone invisible, but only to those she chooses. And then she speaks again, softly. I wasn't a queen of a country, she says, but I was a queen of people's hearts. And wasn't she? Even the tabloids, in all their cynicism, couldn't quite kill her image. She became eternal, a myth with mascara. a flashbulb martyr, an icon in Reeboks who made Buckingham feel stiff and antique. You stop beneath a willow tree. She rests her hand briefly on the bark. This wasn't supposed to last, she says. But it did. You nod. And then she's gone. Vanished like a snapshot before the flash fully fades. But even as her image dissolves, another woman steps forward, not with glamour, but with grit. The clicks are gone, the silence returns, but it carries something sharper. Camilla, the woman they once booed, now crowned, and still walking. There's no trumpet, no golden carriage, no crowd. Camilla enters quietly, so quietly that you nearly miss her. She moves like someone who's learned to occupy space without permission. You know her name. You know the story. Or at least, the version most people still whisper about behind polite smiles and tabloid columns. But here she is, not the other woman. Now, Queen Camilla. Her heels are sensible. Her coat, slate blue. Her hair, unchanged, like a silent rebellion against reinvention. She walks beside you down a long tree-lined path in Regent's Park, and it feels less like a parade, more like an exhale. She glances sideways, catching your hesitation. Yes, she says before you ask. It took a long time to get here. That's an understatement. Camilla's story is a slow burn in a monarchy addicted to spectacle. She wasn't crowned young, or radiant, or beloved by default. In fact, for decades, she was the target, the punchline, the woman blamed for the broken fairy tale. Diana's shadow was long, and public memory, longer. Historians still argue, was Camilla unfairly vilified, or simply an emblem of royal dysfunction, a necessary correction, or an enduring compromise? But she doesn't seem to care anymore. She's made peace with the narrative maybe not so... Lord Chellant outlast it. She stops near a small fenced-off rose garden. Ironic, you think, because the press once compared her to an old boot. While Diana was the English rose, the tabloids were cruel. The public? Harsher still, but Camilla weathered it. A fringe anecdote. In the early 2000s, during her first official royal event, someone shouted "Homewrecker" from the crowd. Camilla smiled faintly, then leaned down to pet a service dog. It was the perfect non-response. Calculated? Maybe. Graceful? Absolutely. She turns now, gesturing toward a bench. You sit. I wasn't trained for this, she admits. But I watched. I listened. Indeed she did. Decades of silence while Charles played the public prince. Years spent in rural quiet, reading, writing, waiting. And when the time came, she didn't burst onto the stage. She simply showed up, again and again, until people stopped looking sideways. You ask what changed? She shrugs. The crown got older. So did I. Her work? Less photographed, but steady. Literacy programs, domestic violence advocacy, book clubs with royal patronage, not flashy, not viral, but real. The monarchy had to evolve, and Camilla became part of that evolution, not as a fairy tale queen, but as a woman who knew the rules, broke them, and survived anyway. She looks up as a flock of pigeons cuts across the sky in a V formation. They still think I don't belong, she says, but the crown sits just fine. Thank you. You smile. She does too. It's not an apology. It's a declaration, a quiet one, spoken without a microphone, but sharp enough to leave a mark. Then she rises, dusts a leaf from her coat, and walks ahead. Not too far, just far enough to remind you that the next generation is waiting. The air smells different now, cleaner, brighter. You hear a click, not a camera, a phone, The era has changed, and power has gone digital. Your world tilts, just slightly. The trees don't vanish, but now they're filtered. A golden glow softens the edges, and every leaf seems curated for aesthetic balance. Welcome to monarchy in the age of ring lights and royal Instagram accounts. No velvet robes here, just branded raincoats, smiling preschool visits, and well-timed tweets. The modern monarchy is alive and very online. You're walking now beside a palace staffer in white sneakers, balancing a camera, a clipboard, and a surprisingly large iced coffee. She doesn't tell you her title, but you know her role: content manager, royal edition. The queen consort is reading at a literacy event at 2, she says. The princess has a mental health Zoom at 3. We need quotes, warm ones, natural, but also firm. You understand. You nod. Sort of. You're in the photo op gardens now. Real flowers, but arranged for drone shots. There's a media pit marked discreetly in the grass. A child in a school uniform waves a tiny flag, and from behind a trimmed yew, Catherine, Princess of Wales, appears. She crouches to greet the child, says something softly, then stands and perfectly pivots into frame. It's seamless. It's royal choreography for a digital age. Historians still argue whether this version of monarchy is authentic adaptation or polished pageantry. But the cameras keep rolling, the followers keep growing, and the crown, once heavy with diamonds, now sits lightly on branding guidelines. A quirky tidbit? The Kensington Palace communications team reportedly uses a content calendar just like any influencer. There are drafts, there are rewrites, and yes, there are emoji considerations. You're handed a phone, the feed scrolls endlessly. There's Meghan, controversial, luminous, political in her clarity. There's Sophie, Countess of Edinburgh, understated but steadily gaining ground. There are pap shots, pap apologies, and official posts with comment sections turned off. You blink. The line between queen and content has blurred. But the strategy? Oh, it's sharp. These women wear their influence with sleek coats and soft lighting. Every hand on a child's shoulder is calculated. Every eye contact moment rehearsed. But that doesn't mean it isn't real. You pass a tree where a plaque reads, "Planted by HRH for Earth Day." There's a hashtag. There's always a hashtag. You sit on a curved bench and try to take it in. The monarchy hasn't lost its power. It's just reformatted. What used to be delivered by carriage now arrives as a curated carousel on your feed. You remember a time when queens whispered behind curtains. Now they post in carousel slides. But the job? It's still the same. Be seen, be believed, be useful. A leaf lands on your sleeve. The social media manager brushes it off and says, "Next up's a walkabout. 10 minutes max. Enough for 15 photos, one quote, and a dog story if we get lucky. You're about to follow when the air shifts again. Subtler this time. Softer. There are no phones now. No cameras. Only a stretch of green, a pond, and a girl kneeling to feed the swans. She turns, and you see the future, not yet crowned, but already watching, because the next queens, they're already here. No applause greets her, just birdsong, and the soft splash of water against the shore. She's young, too young for a crown, but not too young to understand the weight of one. You see it in her eyes as she kneels by the edge of the pond, scattering crumbs with careful precision. A swan glides closer, white as porcelain, arrogant as monarchy. She doesn't flinch. She watches. She is not yet royal by title, not yet sovereign by ceremony, but she's already learning. You recognize the posture, the awareness of being observed, the quiet calculation behind every smile, every pause, every glance. She is the next generation, the ones raised with iPads and protocol, TikTok and tradition. They're being trained to live in two worlds, one of centuries-old pageantry and one of instantaneous public opinion. Historians haven't written about them yet. Not really, because their stories are still uploading. But in this moment, as you sit across from her on the grass, you see the echoes of all the women who came before her. Matilda's defiance, Eleanor's intellect, Elizabeth's solitude, Diana's vulnerability, Camilla's durability, Elizabeth II's resolve. They've all been whispered into her, genetically, institutionally, symbolically. She may never rule a throne in the way her ancestors did. She may never sit for a portrait in full regalia, but she understands the audience. She stands slowly, brushing her skirt free of grass. A phone buzzes in her coat pocket. She ignores it. Instead, she reaches for a notebook. Real paper. Real pen. You glimpse the words as she jots them. Duty, image, privacy, kindness, quiet, power. You ask her what she's writing. A speech, she says, and then smiles. For later. A dog barks in the distance, somewhere behind the hedge. The past shifts restlessly, but she doesn't look back. She's walking forward now, head high, pace slow, breath steady. You stay seated, watching, because the future doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives like this, with soft footsteps and strong spines. She rounds a corner, disappears behind a rose arch, and is gone. But the silence left behind feels different, not empty, waiting. Because in gardens like this, queens don't end. They pause, and someone new steps forward. You take a final breath. Because your journey through crowns and whispers is nearly done. But before you sleep, let's walk one last time, through memory, and myth, and a slow, golden dusk. The light is soft now. Even Regent's Park seems to exhale. The sky is dipped in lavender and amber, the kind of color that doesn't belong to any century, just to the end of the day. You walk alone, but you're not alone. The path is layered now, with echoes. Every footstep feels accompanied by petticoats, polished boots, orthopedic heels, and bare feet beneath protest banners, by queens with crowns, and women who shape nations with no title at all. You hear Matilda's defiant stride through snow, Eleanor's whispers beneath the arbor, Elizabeth's sharp silence in the garden, Henrietta's mask laughter, Catherine's porcelain diplomacy, Mary and Anne's sorrow-steep dignity, Caroline's chessboard strategy, Victoria's morning march, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon's bomb-defying smile, Elizabeth II's perfect wave, Diana's camera-drenched sprint, Camilla's long walk to not-quite acceptance, Catherine's media fluency, Meghan's firewall of boundaries. You hear them all, but you keep walking. Because this isn't just a gallery of faces, it's a timeline still unfolding. The throne may be gilded, but its path leads directly into Regent's Park, where swans glide through public water and school children build monarchs out of Lego on nearby benches. You reach the final curve of the path. The wind picks up gently. It smells of flowers now, familiar ones, lilies, lavender, rosewater, cold iron. A plaque is mounted in stone, no name, just words, etched deep. Power endures in presence. Watch carefully. Walk lightly. Rule kindly. You sit down. The bench is warm. Someone was just here. Maybe all of them were. You close your eyes. You are not royal, but you are witness. You carry the echoes now, the burdens, the wry smiles, the soft command to stand taller. You inhale, hold it, exhale, slowly now, and now, as the last notes of our walk through time begin to fade. Let the rhythm of your breath settle like dew on the evening grass. The queens are resting now, their voices tucked into the folds of history, their crowns placed carefully in velvet-lined memory. The garden is quiet. The leaves no longer rustle with plots or policies, just with wind, and the shadows stretch long and gentle, not ominous, but comforting. There's no need to remember every detail. History will hold the dates, but let your mind keep the impressions, the feel of silk next to steel, the weight of a quiet smile, the sound of footsteps over gravel as one age gives way to the next. You have walked alongside women who commanded without shouting, who lost everything and still governed, who wore expectations like armor and broke it anyway. You've heard their laughter and their silence, their pageantry, and their pain. Now let that drift away. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Let your thoughts grow lighter than lace. It's okay to let the garden dim. You've seen enough for one night. If you dream, let it be of soft footsteps, open gates, and a world ruled not by decree, but by quiet strength. Close your eyes. Sleep deeply. You've earned it. End of script. Sweet dreams.